Marcello Sbrocca, and in this video I'm going to talk about how to play Altissimo on the saxophone. So first I'm going to talk about what Altissimo is and what I believe the 4 different levels of Altissimo are. And then I'm going to give some exercises that you can practice if you're either somebody who's never been able to play an Altissimo note, or you want to get better at playing Altissimo. And then after that I'll talk about extremely high Altissimo notes for people who are wanting to get better at those. Now I'll save for another video talking about flutter tonguing and double tonguing Altissimo, as I find that's a pretty niche technique, and I want to keep this video relatively focused on just the basics of Altissimo. So first off, and if you don't want to hear my explanation of what Altissimo is, you can just skip right to the exercises, because as always I'll leave timestamps down below. So first, what is Altissimo? Well, there's 2 different explanations of Altissimo that I can give. One is really short and simple, and that is, Altissimo is the Altissimo register, and the Altissimo register is the register above the highest note on your saxophone when the saxophone is played normally and when all the keys are open. Most modern saxophones top out at a high F sharp. Some vintage saxophones do not have a high F sharp key, and then some like really old saxophones I think max out at like a D sharp or an E. And so the Altissimo register are the notes above that. Altissimo notes are, a lot of people describe them as not real notes, because what it is, and this is the more complicated explanation, Altissimo notes they're harmonics. They're basically like you're playing overtones. Without getting too much into it, overtones are the frequencies above the fundamental pitch that you're playing. For example, if I play an A into a tuner or something like that, number one, people are going to hear an A, and the tuner is going to register an A at whatever frequency it's at, whatever octave the A is at. But what makes an A on a saxophone sound different from an A on a piano or a violin or an A on a different saxophone are the overtones, the mixture of overtones above that note, which are very complicated. And in other words, it's the overtones over the fundamental pitch that give your tone timbre. And timbre is just like the color of sound. There are pure tones out there. I think the flute can get very close to a pure tone. That is a tone that has no overtones to it. But typically pure tones are reserved for electronic or electronically produced tones or something like that. But anyway, on the saxophone, when you're playing Altissimo, you're kind of using your voicing, embouchure, and air pressure to jump up to one of those harmonics, thus increasing the range of the saxophone. Now we can get into the 4 different levels of Altissimo. Now the reason I break Altissimo up into 4 different levels, as you will, or as you'll see, is because I believe that each of those 4 different levels has a similar logic to their fingerings, and the embouchure, air pressure, and voicing needed to play notes in each of those levels are very similar. So that's why I kind of chunk them together. If you're new to Altissimo, this might be kind of a strange concept. If so, don't worry about it. But once you become more familiar with Altissimo, and especially once you do some of these exercises I'm going to talk about, you might find them to make more sense. But anyway, what are the 4 different levels? Well, the first one is whatever your first altissimo note is to a altissimo B flat. I'll demonstrate. And I'll just say that, the first altissimo note is an F sharp, even though I have a high F sharp key. I'm just going to say that since a lot of saxophones don't have a high F sharp key. So I'm going to play, this is the first level of altissimo, F sharp to B flat. Now the second level of altissimo is B to D sharp. The third level is E to G sharp, a double altissimo G sharp. And the fourth level is A and above. I won't try to play any higher. But anyway, those are the four different levels of altissimo. Again, F sharp to B flat, B to D sharp, E to G sharp, and A and above. And you might be thinking, well, these must get progressively more difficult. And in reality, they don't. In my opinion, the first level of altissimo, and this is important to note if you're a beginner, the first level of altissimo, the F sharp to B flat, is harder, in my opinion, than the second level, B to D sharp. This will hopefully make more sense once I give you one of my, the third exercise I'm going to show. I think it'll make more sense if you've been able to do that exercise. Why the second level is more difficult than the first. Which is to say that if you're new to altissimo and you're having a really hard time playing a G, G sharp, A, and so on, just know that really playing an altissimo G and G sharp well, with a stable, beautiful tone and in tune is actually quite hard. And if you can do that well, you can play several other notes of altissimo a lot more easily. Anyway, now to get on with some of the exercises. The first exercise I'm going to show is one I showed in another video called How to Improve Tone Quality and Ease of Playing on the Saxophone. And that is, it's with the mouthpiece in the neck, and all I'm trying to do is hit the next two harmonics with the neck. Now this works on a tenor saxophone neck, alto saxophone neck. If you have a removable soprano neck, it does work. It's a little bit more difficult on a soprano neck to get the second harmonic, but it is possible. And I believe this is possible on a baritone saxophone neck, but it has been a long time since I've played one, so sorry about that. But in any case, I'm going to play the neck as is, and then I'm going to try and jump up to the next harmonic. And then if possible, you're going to go to the next one. So I'll demonstrate. And so, if you're new to this exercise and you're struggling to even get that first harmonic, know that that's not a problem. It is important though to be able to do this exercise, to at least get that first harmonic, because the muscles that you're using, the voicing, the embouchure, and the air pressure that you're using to make this exercise happen are the exact same muscles you're going to be using when you actually try to play altissimo. If you can't get the second harmonic, that's okay. You definitely want to work towards getting that one. And just like everything on the saxophone, you want to be able to do this exercise without being tense. initially you'll probably be tense. It'll probably not sound very good. It'll probably be really out of tune or something like that. But that's okay. It's just you're always trying to work towards being calm and being able to do this with as little energy as possible. And just like playing the saxophone well, you do not want a lot of pressure with your embouchure, whether we're talking about jaw pressure or the pressure of the muscles used to tighten your mouth around the mouthpiece. None of that should ever be tight, even when we're playing Altissimo. It's kind of a misnomer that to play Altissimo you need to be like biting the mouthpiece in the reed. But in my experience, if you want to play in tune with a beautiful tone and you want to play really high, your embouchure needs to be relatively relaxed. And you should not be using a lot of pressure. It's really, the goal, or a good embouchure is a kind of firm embouchure, but pretty relaxed. A lot of the work is done with your voicing and your air pressure as well. Now, the next exercise is hardly an exercise at all, in my opinion. It's just trying to go up chromatically into the Altissimo register. It's just how I do it, I think, makes it a good exercise if you're somebody who's never been able to play an Altissimo note before. And what I mean by that is we're going to go up into the Altissimo register, but we're going to do it using the front fingerings of the saxophone. Now, every saxophone has it, but there is a lever right here. It's not a key, it's just a lever. It shuts B down, or 1, and it slightly opens up the high F key, or C4 as it's called. Now, some people call this the forked F key. The French call it the X key, which I like because it does a lot more than just play front F. But you can use the X key to help you play, not only does it play an F, but it also plays an E, or it can help you play a different fingering for F, E, F sharp, G, and G sharp. These are pretty common fingerings, but to those of you who are beginners, these are great alternate fingerings instead of using the palm keys. And I think that, like playing a high E is not, of course, an Altissimo note. But in my opinion, if you can play the front fingering of an E, you're kind of halfway there to playing Altissimo, because it's already kind of an odd fingering and voicing and whatnot. And if you can play an E like that, playing an F is not that hard, playing an F sharp is not that much different, and then once you get into a G or G sharp, it's the sensation of playing a front E all the way up to the kind of front G sharp fingering is not that different. Which is why I group them all together. And this is part of why I call this just part of the first level of Altissimo. But anyway, I digress. What you should do is start from a high D and work your way up chromatically, but instead of going to the palm key fingering, once you hit an E, you want to switch to the front fingering, like this. And if you have to spend a while on one note, that's fine. If you don't work your way up that quickly, that's okay. This is, again, it's just a way to kind of start to bridge the gap between, the high register and the Altissimo register. Personally, I don't actually really like the front fingerings that much anymore, but that's neither here nor there. You should be, if you want to play the saxophone well, you should be able to play those fingerings well. Now, the third exercise is perhaps one of the most useful exercises in this video, and it's very similar to a exercise I showed in my video on how to improve tone quality and ease of playing. It's the same exercise, but I'm adding a piece on at the end. This is an exercise I use to help align your embouchure, voicing, and air pressure for the upper register of the saxophone. But in this case, I'm adding a piece on top of it, which I'll get to in a moment. The exercise I'm talking about is where you play a note in the high register starting on a middle F natural, and you finger down basically a fifth. So I'll play a middle F natural and I'll finger down to a low B flat. And then I can go back to the F like this. And try to do it without the octave key if possible. And you want to be doing this as calmly as possible, and you want to try and make it so that as you go back and forth between the different fingerings, that there's as little to no break in the sound as possible. And as you can see, I'm sustaining that F natural pitch even though I'm playing a different fingering. And I'm just going, back and forth. And what you can do is you can work your way all the way up the saxophone. And I'll demonstrate. And I'll stop once I get to the highest note of F sharp. Made a mistake there a second and kind of threw me off. But anyway, as you can see, you're just going back and forth, a fifth apart. As you, some of you who are listening carefully might notice that about halfway up, instead of the notes being about in tune with each other, as in the beginning when I played an F and fingered down to a low B flat, the low B flat fingering produced an F natural that was pretty in tune. But again, about a halfway up, it starts to, or about halfway up, the notes start to get apart. Instead of the fingering being a fifth lower, it ends up being, instead of the fingering that is a fifth apart being about in tune, it ends up being a half step or a step higher. So it ends up being like, it's almost like you're playing up a sixth from the fingering. For example, by the time I get to playing an F sharp and fingering down to a B, the B produces like a G quarter sharp instead of an F sharp. But this exercise is not about pitch. It's about resonance. It's about finding, the correct embouchure, voicing especially, and air pressure. And of course, not using a lot of pressure and doing all of this in a very tensionless way. It's very important, and it's also very important that as you go in between the different fingerings, even though the pitches change quite a bit and it's not very in tune, you still want it to be as smooth as possible, and you don't want there to be any breaks in between the notes for the different fingerings. But again, this is an exercise I already showed in another video, and you may be asking, well, how do we extend this exercise further? Well, even though, we can't go, like at the top, we went high F sharp and fingered down to a B. Obviously, we don't have a G fingering, a G key to go to, but what we can do is instead of, going to a G fingering, we just go from the B fingering that we went down to, and you just go chromatically up from there, all the way up to what will sound a D sharp and will be fingered like an F sharp. So it's like I'm playing a chromatic scale from a high B up to an F sharp, but it's going to sound a sixth above, about. So I'll demonstrate. I'll play a high F sharp I'll finger down to a B while sustaining the same pitch relatively, and then I'll go up chromatically. And now it might make a lot more sense now why I group Altissimo into those 4 different levels. Once I hit the fingering of a high D, and I go D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, I am effectively playing Altissimo B, C, C sharp, D, and D sharp, which that's what I call earlier as the second level of Altissimo. And, just like the rest of this exercise, different parts of the instrument are more difficult to play. It's not like it just gets more difficult as you go up or more difficult as you go down. The beginning of that extended part of that exercise, the B, C natural, C sharp, I find that to be more difficult to play than once I hit the D all the way up to the F sharp, playing an Altissimo B to D sharp. Which is, that's why I group level 2 as level 2. And that's why I say it's easier than level 1. Everything tells me that level 1 of the Altissimo register, as in F sharp to B flat, is more difficult. Whether it's because of this overtone exercise, whether it's because the fingerings are similar, or because once I get to that B and I go to the D sharp, it's so much easier. So, if you're finding yourself having a lot of difficulties with that first level of Altissimo, know that that's not easy, and that once you can play that relatively consistently, getting the second level of Altissimo is going to be a breeze. And now, just before I wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit about that extreme high Altissimo register, which is levels 3 and 4. Personally, I don't, there's not really any exercises that I can share with you to help you with the 3rd and 4th level of Altissimo. There's really not much of a trick to it. If you can do like that last exercise that I demonstrated, where I'm doing a 5th or a 6th apart, that's the best exercise. The more easily you can do that, the more control and consistency you'll have with Altissimo, and it'll help you even when you go to the higher register. But really, there's no secret to that really high register. Personally, what I'm doing is I spread my lip a little thinner on my teeth, and I might pull my teeth back on the reed, my lower teeth, just a hair. But other than that, I'm not doing anything really differently. In fact, if you watch carefully, I'm hardly changing my embouchure throughout, as I play the saxophone at all. Especially once I get into the Altissimo register. It's not really about your embouchure. The embouchure is more of something that you don't want to get in the way. What really does the work when you play the saxophone, whether it's the Altissimo register or the normal register of the saxophone, it's the voicing. So when you get to those extreme high notes, it's more about voicing and not about pressure and embouchure and stuff like that. Some people, they puff their cheeks out when they hit that 3rd level of Altissimo. I don't like how that sounds. If that's the only way that you're able to produce Altissimo in that part of the register, then, whatever, you do what you have to do. But I don't like Altissimo where you puff your cheeks out. I think it sounds thin. I think you have a relatively small amount of control over the Altissimo, and I'm just not a fan of how it sounds, and I think you look silly when you puff your cheeks out when you play Altissimo. So that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And thank you so much for watching.